Hi folks, this is the Fighting Nerd and his co-host, Jolly Roger. I must start this video out with the disclaimer that I am not an expert. I am not an expert on knives. I am not an expert on wounds caused by knives. I am not an expert on wound trauma. I am not an expert on combat. I am not an expert on martial arts. The only thing I am an expert on is not being an expert. So, that out of the way. What I'm going to be talking about is the myths about edged weapons that Hollywood perpetrates, and TV, and the media in general. And I think this is important. I'm not the only one that does it. A lot of people have done videos on this. Metatron did an excellent one about the myths about edged weapons and what they do to people. Right? But I'm going to do it some more for two reasons. First of all, the message needs to get out to people that might not watch military history channel or martial arts oriented channel like Metatron. Although everyone should watch that channel. And they're not going to watch Scholar Gladiatorio with Matt East and some of them. Right? And it needs the word needs to get out because these myths, a lot of them, cause a lot of trouble in society when it comes to police use of force, military use of force, and the use of force of civilians when they defend themselves. Because in the age of the firearm, edged weapons have come to be underestimated as weapons. And since I try to attract people with the nerdy stuff into the sci-fi and the fantasy and things like that, as well as the people into the fighting stuff that are in the knives and martial arts and military history, I'm hoping that some of the nerds who may not have an understanding of edged weapons and how police are and military are trained to deal with edged weapons, or civilians are trained in classes to deal with edged weapons, a greater understanding. Because these myths get, in some cases have caused riots or near riots and caused police officers to lose jobs and lives and things like that. And in some cases, even military people have been prosecuted. But in my opinion, because people underestimate and don't understand edged weapons. Okay, so the first myth or misconception is that wounds don't bleed. Now, you would think this is a no-brainer because people cut themselves with their kitchen knives all the time, right? And they know that when you cut yourself, you bleed. But not on TV. Now, not on TV and movies, with some exceptions. I mean, some of them do try to get the effects right, but not all of them. Now, you've seen cut your finger and it bleeds like crazy, and sometimes they're hard to stop, right? But then, so your whole life, you've been on watching TV where when somebody gets cut, there's just a little line where their shirt's been cut open, and this neat little red line across the chest. And here I am. I remember this vividly because I'm a huge Star Trek fan. In the Amok Time episode, the Vulcan battle axe, the Learbuck, Kirk gets cut with that, and Spock wielded it with his Vulcan superhuman strength and came down there with a friggin' battle axe that looked like it weighed 50 pounds and slashed him across the chest. Cuts through his uniform and a little thin line of blood that doesn't even dribble. Wowzers. Now, granted, it's Kirk and he's awesome, but no. What really would have happened is it would have cut through the skin. It would have gushed blood all over what was left of his uniform. the pectoral muscles would have been severed, and Kirk would have had a hard time moving bombs because you kind of need your pectoral muscles to do that. So, folks, wounds bleed. They bleed a lot. Okay, and that brings me to another myth that's kind of related. Is that skin's the only thing that's cut when an edge weapon is used to cut a human being? No. The biggest offender here is when somebody is fighting knives, and Hollywood seems to think that getting cut here in this area of the arm really doesn't affect you. Well, largely because, of course, wounds don't bleed and it only cuts skin. Right? But the fact of the matter is, you get cut in this area, this is your triceps muscle. Right? And you kind of need that for your arm to do this and this. And muscles don't tend to work the way they should after they've been cleaved in twain. So, if you can imagine, say, a knife like this honker, the MTech Model 2004, wielded by somebody who is presumably trying to do someone else harm and slashing with all their might. And then in the story, they might even be a skilled knife fighter. Right? Slashes across that arm, but hey, little amount of blood, no muscles, no tendons affected. And the fight goes on because the arm is completely unharmed, right? Yeah, just a little inconvenience. Another one, Enter the Dragon, one of my favorite movies, right? The evil Master Hans slashes Bruce across the chest with his prosthetic claw knife, right? Little lines of blood, pectoral muscles still intact, and Bruce even does the manly taste of blood. No. Skin is stretched tightly across your body. It is stretched over muscles, and the muscles are tight. They're stretched too. And when you cut through skin, and it's an edged weapon that is reasonably sharp and wielded with intention and purpose and resolve, the muscles, the tendons, and the skin all get cut at once. There is a tremendous amount of blood, and the muscles don't work anymore. All right. The next one. Empty-handed knife disarms. Now, these are another staple of films and movies where the bad guy comes in with the Norman Bates or an overextended thrust, and he kind of holds it out there for the guy to grab. And then Billy Badass, the movie's hero, grabs that arm and does this kind of dance-like footwork thing and twists the arm a couple of different ways. And in the greatest tradition of Steven Seagal, turns a guy into a human pretzel, crumpled on the ground, comes up holding the knife with a gleam coming from his pearly white teeth. No. Now, a lot of these fancy disarms can be made to work, but they're made to work by people who train with them a lot. They drill, they drill, they drill, they drill. Right? For most people, they don't have time to put in the necessary practice and to maintain that practice to make those kind of moves practical in the real world. They just don't. Even police, SWAT, and the elite military guys, special forces, SEALs, Marine Force Recon, don't train that way. What they train to do is if they wind up and they have nothing in their hand and there's somebody coming at them with a knife, stop that attack somehow with a block or a grab, or get out of the way. Find some way to get distance and transition to a weapon of their own. A firearm, their own blade, some of them carry tomahawks now, whatever. But you need to get distance to deploy another weapon, preferably a firearm, in military cases, and use it. Failing that, anything you pick up, anything that can be readily in hand, get distance, grab a chair, a dinner plate, a book, your hat, anything to keep that guy away from you, that guy and his knife away from you, anything that you can put between that edge and your flesh. Get distance, deploy a weapon, and dispose of the threat. Now, should you train, in my opinion, for some sort of disarm? Absolutely. It's a better option than no option. But the fact of the matter is, even if the guy is completely trained with a knife, and you're Billy Badass, and you're what Delta Force operators want to be when they grow up, empty-handed against an edged weapon by somebody that is intent on doing you harm is a bad situation. If you can avoid it altogether, fine. If you can get distance and run away, great. But when it comes down to it, you need to get away and transition to a weapon. And I've said this in another video, but I'll say it again. There is no good way to go empty-handed against a man with a knife, or a woman with a knife, anybody with a knife. There are only ways that suck less than others. So there's that. And then we have bringing a knife to a gunfight. Now, this is a matter of situation and context. Somebody has a gun in their hand. Even if the knife wielder is 10 feet away, he has a reasonably decent chance of shooting the guy with the knife before he can cross that distance. But distance is everything. There's a famous rule of thumb that's been taught to law enforcement forever. Well, and not forever, at least since about the 80s. Where you have to have your attacker with a knife, or really any kind of melee weapon, has to be 21 feet away for an officer to get his weapon out, bring it up, and fire one round into his attacker's torso. It's been proven over and over again. Some places even say it's even longer distance, 30 feet. And of course it changes. Maybe the officer knows that there's a knife wielding around and he's looking for him and he has his weapon in hand. But there are still a lot of factors, right? Let's say he gets that one round off. Single rounds from a handgun don't always stop a person. Matter of fact, most times they don't. That's a gun net. That's a whole other video. You get shot with a 45, and then one shot will stop anybody. Or just getting shot with anything, one shot stops everybody. It's not true. Now, what they call the Tooler drill, where they teach police to deal with that kind of a charging attack, is that they have to practice getting that one round off while moving offline, so the guy passes him. Because let's say it's a 9mm. Even with a good expansion round, a 9mm might not stop him in the first round. And if he's coming in there just to do the Dorman baits, even if you hit him, he still collides with you, and he might have more than enough life in here to stab the crap out of you. Right? So, and let's say that distance will increase even if you have If you will have more time if you have the weapon in your hand. But still, under stress, a guy coming at you, what if you miss? And then he's in range with that knife. And once he's within arm's reach, right? He hasn't brought a knife to a gunfight. You brought a gun to a knife fight. Because if he's jumping around at close range, and you're trying to get your muzzle on him, he's doing this, and this is what you see, right? It might even be simpler than that. It might just be this or this, right? You think you're going to get your sights aligned? You think you're going to just be able to do this and get a round off? When he's moving and that blade is going all over the place, or it's trying to be thrust into you, the knife, once he's within arm's reach, can go into any direction. You have to get that muzzle on him. And he may not be just using it. He might be smacking the crap out of you while he's slapping you. Maybe he's got hold of that gun. Right? And you have to remember that even for most police, they're not going out there looking to shoot someone. They might be approaching a man with a knife, doesn't know he has a knife, and that knife's in action before the police even see it. It happens. Before that police officer may not even see that knife until it's moving. So when you hear about a poor criminal who attacked a cop with a knife and got shot, and you say, oh man, it was just a knife, right? Couldn't he use a taser? Couldn't he use a baton? Could he use his pepper spray? 21 feet is no distance at all. Even a big fat man like me, if he's pissed off enough to attack somebody with a knife, he's going to cover 21 feet fast, and he is on you. Even if you have shot him, if you didn't hit him in the heart, or you didn't hit him in the head, or take out his spine, if you hit him here, you hit him in the guts, he's got some life left in him, and he's going to take your life. I just ask you to remember that the next time you hear about a story about a policeman or a soldier or a civilian with a firearm defending himself with firearms, shoot a guy with a knife. And there's a lot more of them, but I'm going to end. I'm just going to mention one more major myth. And I got to look at my notes here for a second. Excuse me. Oh, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and look at that. Sorry about the delay there. But this is an important one in my mind. Fencing, fighting, and dueling. Okay, fencing. Everybody thinks about foils, or Three Musketeers and rapiers and all that stuff. Fencing, but not. That's really dueling, and it had a set of rules, and it wasn't really fighting. Now there's sword fighting, which took place on the battlefield. But most duels were first blood, and there were rules to it. Fighting with a sword and fighting with a knife is different than dueling or fencing. Fighting is no hold bars. There's somebody with another edged weapon, right? They might not even be similar. It might be knife against machete. It might be knife. It could be knife against anything, or right? And you see this on TV where people are going. There's a knife-on-knife encounter, for instance, and they're cutting and they're slashing and they're getting the wounds that don't bleed, only cut skin. We mentioned that before. And pretty soon, the guys get, each person's got 4 or 5 cuts each, but they're still just going at it. You don't see them using their live hand or non-weapon hand to try and block those knives coming in. They're not punching or striking in some way to open a way up for a thrust that might do some good, a thrust or a cut that might actually do some damage, real damage, and do some good. You don't see them kicking each other in the shins. You don't see each other grappling and throwing each other to the ground. Nope. They forget they have another hand. and they just slash. And when they slash, it's like this. They're doing these big, wide things so the camera can see them and they look cool. They're not just doing that. Quick in and out. They're doing all of this where they have all of this arm that can be cut or blocked, and where the opponent has 5 years to see it coming. That's what they're doing. No, they're going to be gross motor skills. They're probably going to be much tighter because there's no reason to go way out here. People are going to be getting kicked in the shins. They're going to be thrown on the ground. They're going to be getting punched. It's a fight. That's why a lot of people, and I tend to agree, I don't like the term knife fighter. You are fighting with a knife, right? You just happen to have a knife. If you're fighting with a golf club, are you a golf club fighter? No. So that's another myth. A knife fight is a knife fight. If you have a knife and you're defending yourself with it, you have to assume that the other guy has some sort of other lethal implement, a knife, a crowbar, a hammer, or whatever, a pair of nunchucks, whatever. It's a life and death encounter, so it's a fight for your life. So when you see these things where they're actually blocking knife blade against knife blade when they're using little tiny blades like this, or they just poke at each other or have these superficial slashes, and basically they're not fighting dirty, then they're not fighting. It's fencing, it's dueling, or it's just Hollywood being lazy. There are a lot more things like this, but that I could cover. But what I want you to come away with this more than anything else is do not underestimate edged weapons as weapons. And you have been programmed to by the media, so have I, we all have, for years and years and years. On television, it's because there were so many restrictions on how much blood you can show and how graphic you could be. And in the movies, either they didn't want to do the research or the special effects were too expensive or whatever. But even if you know intellectually that getting cut with a battle axe across the chest is going to be more than superficial, because you have been exposed to that false image over and over again, and images like that through your entire life since you were little. A lot of the times when you see news stories about edged weapons being used against police officers and police officers killing someone, or any kind of a soldier or armed civilian defending himself against an edged weapon and using lethal force, because of this programming that you've gotten your entire life, a lot of the times your first visceral response is, oh man, he shot the guy and all it was a knife. I've heard people say it. And that's where I really want people to stop thinking. There is no degree to lethal. If something is lethal, it kills you. There's no first degree lethal, second degree lethal, first degree lethal. Right? Dead is dead. It doesn't matter if you get your head blown off with a 12 gauge, or you get one of these thrust down through your collarbone into your heart. You're dead. There's no degrees to lethal. And remember that the military, police, or armed civilian that is being attacked with some sort of edged or melee weapon, right, has to make a decision on how he's going to defend himself and protect his life in a split second. In the seconds that it takes to cross that 21 feet, that's where he has to make the decision. He's not sitting there watching CNN and having hours to contemplate what he would do. Got to remember that, folks. All right. As always, I will leave you with this plea and this admonition